The year is 1860, and London is a city of smoke and splendor. Gas lamps flicker along cobblestone streets, carriages rattle over bridges blackened with soot, and the great clock tower of Westminster tolls its warning through the damp night air. Across the Atlantic, America is on the edge of civil strife, but here in Britain, Queen Victoria rules over an empire so vast that people say the sun never sets on it. It is into this glittering, choking world that Clara Whitmore arrives. Clara is 21, the only daughter of Daniel Whitmore, a New York railroad magnate whose fortune was made in steel tracks and coal. In Manhattan society, she is considered dazzling, tall, intelligent, with a sharp wit that makes her both admired and slightly feared among the sons of America's banking dynasties. But to her father, none of that matters. What matters is legacy. And legacy, he believes, requires a marriage that will bind his American fortune to British nobility. So Clara finds herself stepping off a steamship at Southampton, clutching her parasol as the salty wind tangles the ribbons of her bonnet. Within days, she is escorted to London by her mother and a coterie of society guides, women who seem to have memorized every page of Debrett's peerage. They know which viscount has debts, which baronet has a gambling habit, which marquis needs an infusion of cash to keep his crumbling estate upright. And in their eyes, Clara is not a daughter, not a person, she is a dowry with legs. The contrast between New York and London unsettles her immediately. At home, wealth was new, brash, and unashamed. A Whitmore ball on Fifth Avenue featured oysters on ice, champagne pyramids, and laughter loud enough to echo down the block. In London, the laughter is muted, the champagne carefully measured, and every glance weighed for what it might imply. Even the air feels different. In New York, brisk with the smell of the harbor. Here, thick with coal smoke that seeps into her gowns and clings to her gloves no matter how often they are laundered. Her first weeks are consumed by lessons in etiquette. Clara learns that in Britain, a young lady must never extend her hand first when introduced. She must curtsy at exactly the right angle. Too shallow and she appears insolent, too deep and she appears provincial. She may not walk alone in the park. She must never be seen laughing too loudly with a gentleman. And under no circumstances may she accept a gift before an engagement is announced. Even a simple flower could be interpreted as a promise. Clara listens, nods, practices. But beneath her compliance simmers resentment. "Am I a woman?" she writes in her diary one evening, "or am I simply a transaction wrapped in silk?" London's high season begins in May, and with it comes a whirl of dinners, balls, and garden parties. Clara's gowns, shipped from New York and altered by a Mayfair seamstress, are admired everywhere she goes. "The American girl," people whisper as she enters a ballroom on Grosvenor Square. She is appraised like a horse at auction. Her figure, her complexion, her potential for producing heirs. She answers questions politely, dances with practiced grace, and smiles until her cheeks ache. But inside she is restless. None of the titled men paraded before her seem to see Clara herself. They see the railroads, the stocks, the steel. When she asks one young earl about his interests, he drones on about hunting rights. Another, a viscount with perfect posture, speaks of little but his creditors. Clara smiles, nods, and imagines herself shackled to one of them for the rest of her life. One night, after yet another ball, Clara stands at the window of her rented townhouse in Belgravia. Gaslights flicker along the street, their glow softened by fog. She hears the clip of horse hooves, the distant laughter of revelers. And she feels, more strongly than ever, that she does not belong. She is American, her spirit shaped by wide skies, restless ambition, and a culture that, for all its faults, allows a woman to speak a little more freely. Here, in the gilded prisons of Victorian London, her voice is muffled beneath velvet and lace. Her mother enters the room, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Clara," she says, "the Duke of Wexford's nephew asked about you tonight. Imagine what that would mean." Clara forces a smile, but her heart sinks. A duke's nephew would mean security, titles, an anchor in English high society. It would also mean surrendering the last fragments of herself. She closes her diary that night with a single line, underlined twice. I did not cross an ocean just to lose who I am. What Clara does not yet know is that London has its own surprises. In a city of rigid rules and watchful eyes, there are still cracks in the walls of propriety. And it is through one of those cracks that something unexpected, something dangerous, something real, will slip into her carefully managed world. By June, Clara Whitmore has learned to breathe London air without wrinkling her nose, though it still tastes of soot and damp stone. Each morning begins with the rumble of carriages down Belgrave Square and the sharp scent of coal drifting through the lace curtains of her bedroom. The city feels older than time itself, its weight pressing against her in ways New York never had. In Manhattan, buildings climb skyward, daring the future. In London, the houses crouch close together, polished but weary, each brick carrying centuries of memory. Her mother insists that the rhythm of the London season is invigorating. To Clara, it feels like an endless performance. She dresses for morning calls, visiting cards exchanged like currency, then prepares for afternoon teas where the conversation rarely strays beyond weather, servants, or who danced with whom at the last ball. Evenings are reserved for glittering banquets where candlelight catches in diamonds and chandeliers drip like frozen waterfalls. And everywhere always the rules. At Lady Grafton's musicale, Clara is reminded, twice, that she must lower her eyes after 3 seconds of eye contact with an unmarried gentleman. At a Hyde Park promenade, she is instructed not to walk more than 3 paces ahead of her chaperone, lest she appear forward. When a young baronet offers her a spray of hothouse lilies, she is obliged to decline, because flowers are gifts, and gifts suggest intimacy. It is exhausting, she writes in her diary, scratching furiously beneath the flicker of her oil lamp. Every glance, every smile is coded. A nod carries as much weight as a kiss might in America. They call it refinement. I call it suffocation. Yet the city itself fascinates her. Riding in her carriage through Mayfair, she watches the parade of London life. Powdered coachmen on high perches, maids hurrying with baskets of coal, newsboys shouting headlines about the Crimea. At the edge of Hyde Park, she glimpses ragged children selling matches to ladies whose gloves cost more than an entire family's monthly food. The contrast gnaws at her. In New York, poverty was visible, yes, but here it feels stitched into the very fabric of the empire. One afternoon, her mother arranges for her to tour a grand estate outside the city. Clara steps into a drawing room so vast it could swallow her family's New York townhouse whole. Portraits of stern ancestors glare down at her, each generation framed in gilt. Her host, a young viscount, preens as he points out a painting of his grandfather at Waterloo. Clara smiles politely, but inside she recoils. What is the point of all this lineage if the man himself cannot hold a conversation beyond bloodlines? That evening, she tells her maid that she would trade the entire house for one genuine conversation with someone who actually listens. The maid, a London girl named Sophie, only shrugs. That's not what men of rank are for, miss. They marry money, keep up the line, and do as they please. The rest is for the novels. Clara laughs, but the words lodge deep inside her. The invitations keep arriving. Gilt-edged cards for dances at Almack's, for garden fetes at country estates, for lectures at the Royal Academy where ladies nod sagely at paintings they scarcely understand. Clara attends them all, her gowns admired, her prospects whispered about. The American girl, they call her. Sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with disdain, always with a hint of calculation. But at night, alone in her room, Clara strips away the silks and diamonds, staring into her mirror until she sees only herself. A young woman with dark eyes that refuse to look away, with a restless heart that cannot be pacified by pearls. The rules grow heavier with each passing week. At dinner, she is warned not to laugh too loudly because it draws attention to her teeth. At tea, she is reminded to eat only with her right hand and to never take the last cake on the plate. At a garden party, she steps too close to a young man while examining a rosebush, and her mother scolds her for hours afterward. Do you want the gossips to say you are desperate? Clara clenches her fists, though she smiles as propriety demands. One night, at a ball shimmering with waltz music and the scent of roses imported from France, she watches couples glide across the floor. Each movement, each twirl is rehearsed, approved, perfected. It is beautiful, but it is not free. She realizes that her entire existence here has become a waltz, elegant, graceful, but bound to the rigid steps someone else has written. In that moment, she feels a surge of rebellion. Not wild enough to throw off the dance, not yet, but enough to plant a seed. As she leaves the ball, stepping into the foggy night where lamplight blurs into halos, she whispers to herself, I will not let them choreograph my entire life. What Clara does not know, what she cannot yet imagine, is that her silent vow will be tested sooner than she expects. Because in the very heart of this city of smoke and silk, she is about to cross paths with someone who does not fit into the dance at all. Someone who will look at her not as a dowry, not as an heiress, but as herself. And once their eyes meet, the rules she has memorized so carefully may begin to unravel, thread by thread. The ballroom at Lady Ashworth's townhouse is a blaze of light and polish. Chandeliers drip with crystal, gas lamps hiss faintly against the velvet drapes, and the polished floor reflects 100 silk skirts swaying in rhythm to the orchestra's violins. Clara Whitmore stands near the edge of the dance floor, her gloved hand resting lightly on her mother's arm, her eyes scanning the crowd with the polite detachment she has perfected. Another night, another round of introductions. A baronet who smells of brandy. A colonel who speaks more to his medals than to the women before him. A young duke who looks at her as though appraising the worth of her father's railroads rather than the woman herself. Clara curtsies, smiles, listens. Inside, her thoughts drift like restless birds seeking open sky. She slips away for a moment, retreating toward the house's library, a quieter space where the music fades to a distant hum. Here the air is cooler, scented with leather and dust rather than perfume. Rows of books line the shelves, spines faded, wisdom trapped behind gilt letters. Clara runs her fingers across them and allows herself a single unladylike sigh of relief. That's when she hears it, the scrape of a chair, the soft rustle of papers. She isn't alone. A man sits at a table near the window, half turned toward the lamplight, scribbling notes onto a scrap of paper. He is not dressed like the other men. His coat is plain black, not cut in the latest fashion, and his hands are ink-stained. His hair, dark and slightly disheveled, curls at his collar. When he looks up, she notices his eyes first, steady, searching, with the sharpness of someone accustomed to observing more than he says. Forgive me, Clara begins, instinctively lowering her gaze as etiquette demands. I didn't realize. No need, the man interrupts, his American accent unmistakable. I came in here to escape as well. Her head snaps up. American. The word feels like a secret handshake in this city of rigid propriety. You're from home? She asks cautiously. Boston, he replies, rising to his feet. Jonathan Hale. Doctor. He gives the barest bow, more practical than polished. And you must be Miss Whitmore. Everyone's been talking about the heiress from New York. Clara stiffens. She has heard the whispers herself, but to hear it stated so bluntly, without flattery, without pretense, both unsettles and intrigues her. And what do they say? That you're here to rescue some impoverished lord with your father's fortune, Jonathan answers dryly. Forgive me, but that's the way they talk. Instead of taking offense, Clara feels a laugh bubble in her chest. The honesty is startling, refreshing, like cool air after too much perfume. At least they're consistent, she says. I've yet to meet anyone who asks what I want. Jonathan tilts his head, studying her. And what do you want, Miss Whitmore? No one has ever asked her so directly. The words nearly catch in her throat. She should give a polite answer, stability, family, duty. But under his gaze, the truth slips out. To be seen as something more than a dowry wrapped in silk. For a moment, neither speaks. The muffled strains of the orchestra filter in from the ballroom, violins playing a waltz everyone else is dancing. Here in the library, it feels like another world. Jonathan's voice softens. I know something about being unseen. In London, a physician from America is barely tolerated. From Boston and Irish stock? Even less. They call me to patch up soldiers and factory boys, but they won't invite me to their tables. Clara frowns. But you save lives. Shouldn't that matter more than lineage? His smile is brief, tinged with weariness. Not in this city. Here, bloodlines outrank blood itself. The words strike her like a bell. They both stand on the margins. Her, wealthy but dismissed as new money. Him, skilled but disregarded as the wrong kind. For the first time since her arrival in London, Clara feels truly understood. A footman appears in the doorway, blinking in surprise at the sight of them together. Miss Whitmore, Lady Ashworth is asking for you. His glance at Jonathan carries the faintest trace of disdain. Clara inclines her head gracefully. Of course. She turns back to Jonathan, lowering her voice. Thank you, Dr. Hale, for reminding me I'm not alone. His bow is shallow, but his eyes hold hers for one heartbeat longer than propriety allows. Anytime, Miss Whitmore. She sweeps past the footman, her heart strangely light. For weeks, London has felt like a stage on which she plays a role she never chose. But tonight, in a quiet library with a man society barely acknowledges, she felt more herself than she has since stepping off the ship. Later, as she climbs into her carriage, her mother chattering about which viscounts were in attendance, Clara touches the edge of her diary hidden in her reticule. She knows what she will write tonight. At last, someone looked at me and saw more than the fortune. He saw me. What she does not realize is that society, with its endless eyes and hungry gossip, has already noticed. And soon the whispers will begin. The following week, London's social season spins on like a great, glittering machine, churning out ball after banquet, tea after garden party. Clara Whitmore endures them all with practiced poise, but her mind drifts back to the library at Lady Ashworth's, the ink-stained hands, the steady gaze, the unvarnished honesty of Dr. Jonathan Hale. She tells herself it was chance, a fleeting encounter. Yet when she enters the grand hall of the Royal Academy for a lecture on the newest advances in photography, her breath catches. There he is, standing at the edge of the crowd, his dark hair unruly as ever, his coat a little too plain for this gathering of nobility. He notices her almost instantly, and though propriety demands that she look away, her eyes hold his for one reckless moment longer than they should. The lecture is a haze. Something about capturing an image in minutes instead of hours. Clara sits among rows of jewel-toned gowns, her gloved fingers twisting restlessly in her lap. When it ends, guests spill into the adjoining gallery to admire the exhibits. Clara follows her mother, but as they pass into a quieter corridor lined with landscapes, she feels it, a presence at her shoulder. Miss Whitmore. The voice is soft, carefully measured. Clara turns, heart hammering. Jonathan Hale stands half a step behind her, maintaining just enough distance to preserve appearances. Yet his eyes, warm, intent, make the air between them hum. Doctor, she replies, her own voice steadier than she feels. I hadn't expected to see you here. He glances at the paintings, then back to her. I attend these events when I can. Not for the company, but for the ideas. Science, art, they belong to everyone, not only to dukes and earls. She allows herself a smile. Careful, doctor. That sounds dangerously radical. His lips twitch in the ghost of a grin. Truth often does. For a few precious minutes, they walk side by side, speaking in hushed tones that could be mistaken for polite commentary on the artwork. Jonathan tells her about the fever wards he has been tending in the East End, the endless nights and the small triumph of saving a child others thought lost. Clara listens, rapt, her world of etiquette and silks dissolving around her. She tells him, in turn, of the suffocating expectations pressed upon her, every curtsy measured, every smile dissected for meaning. "Sometimes I feel as though I am not a woman at all," she admits quietly, pausing before a seascape, "but a dowry wrapped in lace." Jonathan's gaze sharpens, and he lowers his voice further. "You are more than that, Clara. Anyone with eyes can see it." Her name on his lips startles her. It is the first time he has spoken it. Improper, certainly. Intimate, undeniably. Heat rushes to her cheeks, and she glances around, terrified someone might have overheard. But the corridor is empty save for them. "I mustn't," she begins, then stops. What? She mustn't speak openly? Mustn't crave honesty? Mustn't feel the quickening of her pulse whenever his eyes meet hers? Every rule she has learned tells her this is dangerous. And yet, for the first time since arriving in London, she feels truly alive. Jonathan seems to read her conflict. He steps back half a pace, giving her space, his expression gentling. "Forgive me. I don't wish to cause you harm. But I also will not pretend not to see you as you are." The words pierce her more deeply than flattery ever could. She swallows hard, then dares to answer. "And how is that, doctor?" He holds her gaze steadily. "As a woman with a mind sharper than most men in this room. A woman who deserves to choose her own life." For a moment, silence stretches between them, heavy and electric. Somewhere in the gallery beyond, voices rise in polite laughter. But here, in this quiet corridor, Clara and Jonathan are suspended outside the rules of their world. The spell is broken when her mother's voice rings down the hall. "Clara? Where have you gone?" Clara startles, heart lurching. She takes 2 hurried steps back, smoothing her skirts. Jonathan inclines his head, his face already shuttered into neutrality. By the time her mother rounds the corner, he looks every bit the courteous acquaintance. "There you are," her mother scolds lightly, taking her arm. "Do not wander, darling. People will talk." "Yes, mother," Clara replies, her voice obedient, though her pulse still races. She dares one last glance over her shoulder. Jonathan is already turning away, melting into the crowd of gentlemen in black coats. That night, Clara sits at her writing desk, the lamplight pooling across a blank page. She dips her pen into ink and hesitates. To commit anything to paper is risky. Letters can be intercepted, journals discovered. But the words burn within her, demanding release. "Today I spoke with someone who saw me, not my fortune. Someone who believed I could choose. I know it is forbidden. I know it is dangerous. But I cannot unhear his words, nor do I wish to." She lays down her pen, her hand trembling, and blows out the lamp. In the darkness, she realizes that something has shifted. A crack has opened in the polished surface of her world, and through it, a different kind of future glimmers, one both terrifying and irresistible. By July, Clara Whitmore could recite the rules of London society as though they were holy scripture. She knew exactly how many seconds a lady could hold a gentleman's gaze. She knew that laughter, if too loud, marked her as vulgar. She knew that her gloves must always remain on during a dance, and that she must never, under any circumstances, accept a gift from a man who was not her betrothed. The rules came at her from every angle. Her mother's careful corrections, her chaperones' sharp reminders, the unspoken glances of matrons who sat in the corners of ballrooms like watchful hawks. Every day felt like walking a tightrope spun of silk and steel. It should have been suffocating. And yet, in the quiet of her room each night, she clung to one truth. Jonathan Hale had spoken her name. Clara. Not Miss Whitmore, not the American heiress. Just Clara. It was improper. It was dangerous. It was unforgettable. One damp afternoon, Clara sat through a tea hosted by Lady Grantham, where conversation consisted of dissecting which gowns were flattering and which young men were worth the trouble. Clara smiled, nodded, and counted the minutes. When the trays of cakes were passed, she carefully declined the last slice, another unspoken rule. "Remember, my dear," her mother whispered as they left, A lady's restraint is her crown. Excess is for the vulgar. Clara bit her tongue. Restraint, restraint, always restraint. Yet her heart was full of a reckless abundance she could not speak aloud. 2 days later, during a morning walk in Hyde Park, properly chaperoned of course, Clara noticed something unusual. As her party strolled past a bench near the Serpentine, a small folded envelope lay tucked beneath the iron armrest. Her gaze flicked across the path and caught sight of Jonathan standing at a distance, hat in hand as if he were simply admiring the waterfowl. Their eyes met for the briefest instant and Clara's pulse leapt. When her companions paused to adjust parasols and chatter about the weather, Clara let her gloved fingers drift casually over the bench. The envelope slipped into her palm with practiced grace. No one noticed. Back in her room, with the door locked and the curtains drawn, Clara opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a single violet, pressed and fragile, along with a scrap of paper in Jonathan's strong hand. For when the rules make you feel like a prisoner, even in cages, flowers bloom. Clara pressed the violet to her lips, her throat tight. A gift. The very thing she had been warned against most fiercely. To accept it was a violation of etiquette. To treasure it, as she knew she would, was a silent declaration of defiance. That evening, her mother entered her room unannounced and found her seated at her dressing table, the violet hidden hastily within her diary. "You were quiet today, Clara," her mother observed. "I hope you aren't tiring of London. The season is nearly at its peak." "I am reflective, mother," Clara replied, forcing a small smile. Her mother sighed, smoothing the silk of her own gown. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime. You mustn't squander it with hesitation. Remember, every glance you give, every step you take is watched. One slip could undo everything." Clara nodded dutifully, but inside she burned. One slip, she thought, might be the only thing that truly belongs to me. The following week, the rules tightened further. Gossip had begun to ripple through drawing rooms, whispers that Miss Whitmore was distracted, headstrong, perhaps too American in her bearing. The matrons murmured that her curtsies were a fraction too shallow, her smiles a shade too warm. To Clara's horror, she overheard 2 women speculate that she might already have a secret attachment. That night, she lay awake staring at the canopy of her bed, the violet pressed against her heart beneath her nightdress. The rules, once suffocating but bearable, now felt like shackles dragging her toward a life she no longer wanted. And yet, beneath the fear, there was something else, a thrill, sharp and sweet. For the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore was keeping a secret of her own choosing. Days later, fate offered her another glimpse of Jonathan. At a lecture on public health, he stood at the back of the hall, speaking afterward with other physicians. Clara, seated with her mother and a cluster of titled ladies, felt her chest tighten at the sight of him. She longed to cross the room, to speak freely, to tell him that his violet had given her courage. But the weight of eyes held her in place. As the ladies debated the merits of sanitation in the slums, a topic none of them truly understood, Clara caught Jonathan's gaze once more. Just for an instant. But it was enough. The orchestra of etiquette swelled louder around her, every rule demanding obedience. Yet in that single glance, Clara felt them weaken. She was no longer certain she wanted to follow the dance at all. By August, the London season was a gilded stage of endless balls, teas, and carriage rides. But beneath the glitter of chandeliers and the shimmer of silk gowns, Clara Whitmore felt the first cracks forming in her carefully curated reputation. It began innocently enough, a passing remark overheard at Lady Worthington's musicale. 2 matrons whispered behind lace fans, their voices pitched just low enough to pretend secrecy but loud enough for Clara to catch. "Miss Whitmore has a curious air about her." "Indeed. Distracted, don't you think? Almost as though her thoughts are elsewhere." "Elsewhere." Clara's cheeks burned, though she pretended not to hear. They weren't wrong. Her thoughts were elsewhere, on Jonathan Hale, the physician whose steady gaze lingered in her memory longer than any polite conversation should allow. Within days, the whispers multiplied. A glance held too long, a smile deemed too warm, an unguarded expression caught when she thought no one was watching. Society noticed everything. The same etiquette that promised to protect a woman's reputation also created a cage in which even the faintest flutter of feeling became evidence for speculation. At a garden party hosted by the Duchess of Marlborough, Clara felt the sting more directly. As she admired a row of roses, Lady Harcourt sidled up beside her, parasol tilted just enough to cast both shade and suspicion. "My dear Miss Whitmore," Lady Harcourt drawled, "I couldn't help but notice your interest in Dr. Hale at last week's lecture. How refreshing that an American lady should take such enthusiasm for public health." Her smile was sharp as a blade. Clara's pulse jumped. She forced herself to answer smoothly. "I admire knowledge in all its forms, Lady Harcourt. I find his lectures quite illuminating." "Ah yes," Lady Harcourt replied, lips curving in a smirk. "Illuminating indeed. One hopes, of course, that your admiration remains purely intellectual. You wouldn't wish to give society the wrong impression." The warning landed with the weight of a gavel. Clara managed a polite laugh, but her hands trembled inside her gloves. The rules were merciless. Any rumor, no matter how unfounded, could tarnish her reputation beyond repair. That evening, back in her family's townhouse, Clara found her mother pacing the parlor like a general preparing for battle. "Clara," she said without preamble, "I've received word from Lady Grantham. There are whispers about you, about your comportment." "My comportment?" Clara repeated, her voice tight. "You've been too visible, too warm. American." Her mother's voice cracked with frustration. "Do you understand what's at stake? If society decides you are indiscreet, no respectable man will propose. We did not cross an ocean for you to squander this chance." Clara pressed her lips together, fighting tears. She wanted to shout that she was not a prize on display, that she wanted a marriage of substance, not convenience. But she also knew the truth of her mother's words. Reputation in London was as fragile as glass. One slip and it shattered. The next afternoon brought another test. Clara and her mother attended a luncheon at Lord Ashcroft's, a gathering of carefully chosen families. Among the guests, unexpected, uninvited in Clara's imagination, stood Jonathan Hale. He was speaking with a group of gentlemen near the terrace doors, his expression serious, his presence commanding. The room seemed to tilt. Clara's mother stiffened beside her. "You will not so much as glance at him," she hissed under her breath. "Do you understand?" Clara nodded, heart pounding. Yet as the luncheon unfolded, avoiding Jonathan felt like trying not to breathe. Every movement in her periphery drew her eyes toward him. Once, as she reached for a glass of lemonade, their gazes met across the room. Only for a heartbeat. Only long enough for Clara to feel the earth shift beneath her feet. But one heartbeat was enough. Lady Harcourt, sharp-eyed as ever, caught the exchange. Clara saw the flicker of recognition in her gaze, the curve of satisfaction on her lips. The whispers would grow louder now. That evening, Clara escaped to her room under the pretense of a headache. From beneath the false bottom of her diary, she pulled out Jonathan's violet, now dry and brittle but still carrying the faint memory of its fragrance. She pressed it to her chest, torn between fear and longing. She thought of the rules, the endless codes of conduct that had governed her every move since arriving in London. She thought of Jonathan's note, "Even in cages, flowers bloom." And she realized the truth. No matter how tightly society tried to bind her, something within her was already reaching toward the light. The next morning, as Clara prepared for yet another round of social calls, Mary the maid whispered while fastening her gown. "Miss," she said softly, eyes darting toward the door, "they say Lady Harcourt has been spreading tales. That you're carrying on with the doctor." Clara's breath caught. "And what do you believe, Mary?" The maid's lips quirked into a smile. I believe the doctor looks at you like a man who sees more than rules and ribbons. And I believe that frightens them more than any scandal ever could." For the first time in weeks, Clara laughed, a small, startled sound. Because Mary was right. What frightened society wasn't her indiscretion. It was her possibility. But possibility could quickly turn to ruin. The rumors were gaining weight. Unless she acted carefully, deliberately, her story in London could end before it truly began. The rumors spread like smoke through velvet drapes, thin, pervasive, impossible to grasp, but staining everything they touched. Clara Whitmore felt their weight with every polite smile and every too casual glance in her direction. London society was watching her, measuring her, waiting for a misstep. And yet, the more they whispered, the more determined she became. It was Jonathan who made the first move. A letter, pressed discreetly into her hand by a young messenger boy as her carriage rolled up before Hatchett's bookshop. The envelope bore no name, only the faint trace of violets on the paper. Clara tore it open in her room that evening, her heart pounding. "Miss Whitmore," it read. "Forgive the boldness of my request. I know the danger I invite upon us both. But truth cannot live forever in shadows. If you are willing, meet me at the Orangery in Kensington Gardens tomorrow at 3:30. Discretion will be our ally. J.H." She read the words again and again until they blurred. Her first instinct was terror. If discovered, such a meeting could ruin her entirely. But beneath the fear was something stronger, an undeniable pull toward him. A longing she could no longer smother beneath etiquette and duty. The next afternoon, Clara made her excuses. She told her mother she was visiting the milliner with Lady Worthington, a convenient lie supported by the fact that her hat ribbons did, in fact, need replacing. Her maid Mary raised an eyebrow when Clara requested her simpler walking dress rather than her new silk gown, but said nothing. By the time she reached Kensington Gardens, Clara's nerves thrummed like a violin string. The Orangery, with its great glass windows and rows of orange trees in neat lines, was nearly empty in the late afternoon. The scent of citrus hung in the air, mingling with the faint damp of London earth. And there he was. Jonathan Hale stood near the far end, hat in hand, his posture tense, his gaze fixed on her the moment she entered. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted, his voice low, reverent. Clara hesitated, every rule of propriety screaming at her to turn back. But her feet carried her forward. "Dr. Hale." For a moment, they simply looked at one another, the silence louder than words. Then Jonathan spoke, his words tumbling out with restrained urgency. "I should not have asked you here. It is reckless, dangerous. But I could no longer bear the half-truths, the stolen glances. I needed to see you, without an audience, without judgment." Clara's throat tightened. "And what would you say to me now that we are alone?" He stepped closer, the faintest hint of citrus and tobacco clinging to his coat. "That since the first moment I saw you, you've unsettled every certainty I thought I possessed. That I find myself searching for your face in every crowded room. That I cannot, will not, pretend indifference any longer." Clara's breath caught. This was everything she had secretly hoped for, yet everything she had been taught to fear. "Jonathan," she whispered, daring to speak his name, "you know what they're already saying. If anyone were to see us here." "Then let them," he said fiercely. But then more softly, "No. Forgive me. I would never risk your future so carelessly. Tell me only this, do you feel what I feel, Clara? Or am I a fool chasing shadows?" The sound of her name in his voice undid her. She lifted her chin, her gloved hands trembling at her sides. "You are not a fool." For a heartbeat, silence hung between them, heavy with everything unspoken. Then Jonathan reached out, slowly, as though giving her every chance to retreat. His fingers brushed hers, a touch so slight it could almost be denied. But Clara did not pull away. The sensation was electric, more intimate than any waltz or whispered compliment. For the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore chose defiance. She let his hand close around hers. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "But I know this, I am tired of living by rules written only to keep women silent and still." Jonathan's eyes shone with something between admiration and longing. Then we will write our own." They stood there for several minutes, hands entwined, daring the world to intrude. Eventually, Clara forced herself to step back. "I must go. If I am missed." He nodded, though the reluctance was etched in every line of his face. "Go. But remember, Clara, whatever they whisper, the truth between us is ours alone." As she left the orangery, Clara felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. For the first time, she had stepped outside the suffocating circle of Victorian propriety. She had risked everything, and in doing so discovered a taste of freedom. But freedom came at a price. And as the sun dipped low over London, Clara knew it was only a matter of time before society demanded its reckoning. The next morning, Clara awoke with the lingering warmth of Jonathan's hand still ghosting across her palm. She had dreamed of him, of sunlight pouring through glass, of the sharp scent of oranges, of a voice speaking her name as though it were the most precious word in the English language. But daylight brought reality, and with it the cold edge of fear. Her mother was already in the parlor, fluttering with invitations and gossip sheets, her eyes sharp as pins. "Clara, we've been invited to Lady Ashcroft's garden party on Saturday," she said briskly. "It is imperative that you appear radiant. Rumors are swirling, and we must prove them nonsense through sheer elegance." Clara forced a nod, though her stomach twisted. Rumors. They had already grown loud enough to reach her mother's ears. By the time Saturday arrived, Clara felt as though she were walking into a courtroom rather than a garden. The Ashcroft estate glittered with color, bright parasols, gowns in every shade of summer, roses climbing trellises in careful perfection. Yet behind every polite smile lurked calculation. She felt the eyes of society upon her as surely as if they were arrows trained on her back. "Do not falter," her mother whispered as they entered, her hand pressing firmly against Clara's arm. For the first hour, Clara performed flawlessly. She spoke of poetry and politics in equal measure, laughed at the appropriate volume, declined a second slice of cake. But the weight of scrutiny pressed heavier with each passing moment. Every tilt of her head, every flick of her fan, seemed to draw evaluation. And then it happened. Across the expanse of roses and lace parasols, Clara caught sight of Jonathan. He stood near the refreshment table, speaking with a pair of older gentlemen. His presence stole the breath from her lungs. He looked different here. Not the conspirator of the orangery but the respectable physician, his posture crisp, his words measured. Yet when his eyes found hers across the garden, the mask slipped for just an instant. That brief spark of recognition, unmistakable, dangerous, was all it took. Lady Harcourt saw it. Of course she did. Her gaze flicked from Jonathan to Clara and back again, her lips curling in satisfaction. She leaned toward her companion, murmured something behind her fan, and both women turned to look at Clara with identical, predatory smiles. Panic surged. Clara forced herself to look away, to resume her conversation with Lord Pembroke about the weather. But her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped her parasol. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of brittle conversation and pounding heartbeats. Clara could feel the whispers spreading through the garden like wildfire. Every glance seemed sharper, every laugh edged with mockery. By the time she returned home, her composure was cracking. She escaped to her room under the pretense of a headache, where Mary found her sitting rigid at her dressing table, still in her gown, her hands clenched into fists. "They saw," Clara whispered. "I know they saw." Mary closed the door firmly before crossing the room. "Miss, people always see what they wish to see. But you must decide whether you'll let them write your story, or write it yourself." Clara met her maid's gaze in the mirror. "If they discover the truth, if they believe I have feelings for him, I'll be ruined." Mary's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Ruined for their world, perhaps. But maybe not for yours." The next day, Clara's fears proved well-founded. At breakfast, her mother slammed the gossip sheet onto the table, her face pale with fury. The column was short, buried beneath reports of Parliament and theater openings, but its sting was lethal. Certain young ladies, though newly arrived from abroad, appear to have forgotten the decorum expected in polite society. Lingering glances with gentlemen of unsuitable station are hardly the path to respectable matrimony. Her father frowned but said nothing, retreating behind his newspaper. Her mother, however, turned her full wrath on Clara. "This is your doing. You've been reckless. We came to London for your future, Clara, not to see it thrown away over a man with no title, no fortune." "Enough, mother," Clara interrupted, her voice sharper than she intended. "I will not be auctioned off like a prize cow. I want a life of my own choosing." The room fell silent. Her mother stared as though Clara had struck her. "Do you have any idea what you're saying? Without marriage you are nothing in this world." "Nothing." Clara's throat ached, but she refused to look away. "Then I would rather be nothing on my own terms than something on theirs." Her mother's eyes filled with angry tears. "You sound just like your father's sister, and she died alone with no one to mourn her but the servants. Is that what you want?" Clara pushed back her chair and stood, her appetite gone. "I want to be free." She fled to her room before her mother could answer. That night, as London's gas lamps flickered to life, Clara sat by her window clutching Jonathan's violet. The scandal was out now, half buried but growing. Every step she took would be watched. Every whisper would cut deeper. And yet, beneath the fear, she felt something else. A clarity. For the first time, Clara Whitmore understood that her reputation might not survive this. But perhaps her soul might. By the end of the week, the whispers had hardened into something more dangerous. Ultimatums. Her father called her into his study on a gray Thursday morning. The air smelled of pipe smoke and ink, the heavy mahogany desk cluttered with ledgers from his investments. He looked older than Clara remembered, his temples silvered, his brow furrowed as though etched by years of worry. "Sit, Clara," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. His voice was calm, but too calm, the still surface of a pond hiding unseen depths. Clara obeyed, smoothing her skirts. She braced herself. "I have received 2 letters in the past 3 days," her father began. "One from Lord Pembroke's mother, gently inquiring whether you are seriously disposed toward her son. The other, from Lady Harcourt, couched as concern for our family's standing. Both make reference to rumors." "Rumors, Clara? About you and Dr. Hale?" Her pulse quickened, but she held her father's gaze. "And what did you tell them?" "That my daughter is a woman of sense. That she would never jeopardize her reputation or her family's prospects for the sake of infatuation." His voice hardened. "Tell me I was not wrong." Clara swallowed. The lie sat heavy on her tongue, but she could not force it out. "Father," she whispered, "Jonathan Hale is not a passing fancy. He is." Her father's palm slammed the desk, rattling the inkwell. "Enough. Do you not understand? That man is beneath you. No title, no estate, no fortune to match yours. If you persist, you'll condemn yourself to obscurity. And worse, you'll drag this family with you." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock. Clara forced herself to breathe evenly. "I would rather live obscurely with honesty than richly in chains." Her father stared at her as though she had spoken in a foreign tongue. "Your mother has spoiled you with talk of independence. But the world is not so forgiving. If you defy me, Clara, you will have no dowry, no introductions, no protection. You will be on your own." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Clara rose, her legs trembling but her voice steady. "Then perhaps being on my own is better than belonging to someone who doesn't see me." She turned and left before her father could answer, her heart pounding so fiercely she thought it might break free of her ribs. The next evening, the Whitmores attended a ball at Lord Pembroke's estate. Clara's mother had insisted she wear her finest gown, blue silk with seed pearls stitched into the bodice, as if splendor could smother scandal. The ballroom glittered with candlelight, the air thick with perfume and violins. Lord Pembroke himself, tall and handsome in his white waistcoat, bowed deeply before Clara as the orchestra struck up a quadrille. His hand was steady, his smile practiced. "My lady," he murmured as they danced, "I hear troubling rumors. Allow me to put them to rest by asking for the honor of your hand." Clara's steps faltered. "You propose?" "A match between us would silence tongues," Pembroke said smoothly, guiding her through the steps. "Our families would rejoice. You would be a countess one day. And I would be most fortunate indeed." The room swirled around them. Clara forced herself to keep moving, her gloved hand in his, her smile frozen. She knew what her parents wanted. A title, a secure future, the restoration of their standing. But all she could think of was Jonathan's voice in the orangery. "We will write our own." When the dance ended, Pembroke bowed again, expectation gleaming in his eyes. "I shall call upon your father tomorrow." Clara curtsied automatically. "As you wish, my lord." The words tasted like ashes. That night, in the privacy of her chamber, Clara paced like a caged animal. Mary sat quietly on the bed, watching her mistress unravel. "They mean to marry me off to Pembroke," Clara burst out. "They think it will silence the whispers. That I will trade my heart for a coronet." "And will you?" Mary asked softly. Clara stopped, her breath catching. Images collided in her mind. Pembroke's polished smile, her mother's pleading eyes, her father's clenched jaw. Then Jonathan's hands, rough but gentle. His letter. His violet. His belief that she was more than society's ornament. "No," Clara said at last, her voice fierce. "I cannot." Mary nodded as though she had expected nothing else. "Then you must decide quickly. A gentleman like Pembroke does not wait long for his answer. And the world is not kind to ladies who choose scandal over safety." Clara sank into her chair, pressing her face into her hands. The ultimatum was clear: security or love, duty or defiance. To follow her heart was to risk ruin. To obey was to lose herself forever. As dawn crept through the curtains, Clara rose with a decision burning in her chest. She could no longer wait for fate to choose for her. She would make her own choice. The morning after the Pembroke ball, Clara's household buzzed with anxious energy. Servants whispered in hallways, her mother's footsteps tapped furiously across polished floors, and her father shut himself away in his study with the door firmly locked. Clara sat before her dressing mirror, hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked every inch the dutiful daughter, hair pinned neatly, muslin gown crisp and white, but beneath the calm facade her heart beat with the defiance of a storm. At precisely 10 o'clock, Lord Pembroke's carriage rolled up before the Whitmore townhouse. Its polished black sides gleamed in the weak London sun, horses stamping, plumes bobbing as if even they knew this was no ordinary call. Her mother swept into Clara's room without knocking. "He's here. Stand straight, smile softly. Do not ruin this with one of your notions." Clara rose, every nerve screaming. She wanted to obey, to silence the voices that had plagued her family for weeks. She wanted peace. But peace at the cost of herself was no peace at all. In the parlor, Pembroke looked impeccable, his cravat knotted with military precision, his boots gleaming. He bowed deeply. "Miss Whitmore, I am honored to call upon you this morning." Her father cleared his throat, already beaming. "Lord Pembroke, we are delighted. My daughter." "Father," Clara interrupted, her voice carrying more steel than she had ever dared use in that room. "I would speak for myself." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Pembroke straightened, curiosity flickering across his face. "Lord Pembroke," Clara said, her chin high, "your offer is generous and I am grateful for your regard. But I cannot accept." Her mother gasped. Her father's expression curdled from pride to fury. Pembroke's brow arched in surprise, though his tone remained measured. "May I ask why?" Clara drew a breath that filled her lungs like fire. "Because marriage should be more than reputation and title. It should be built on honesty, respect, and love." Without those, I would wither in any household, no matter how grand. Her mother's fan clattered to the floor. Her father surged to his feet, face flushed. Clara, do you comprehend what you are saying? You shame us before one of England's most distinguished families. But Clara did not falter. I would shame myself more by pretending feelings I do not possess. For a moment no one spoke. Pembroke studied her, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Well, he said finally, it seems Miss Whitmore has a spirit I had not fully appreciated. I cannot fault her honesty. Good day. He bowed once more and departed, his boots striking the marble floor like the closing of a verdict. As the door shut behind him, Clara's father turned on her, voice trembling with rage. You have destroyed us. No, father, Clara said quietly. I have saved myself. That evening, Clara walked alone in Kensington Gardens, the weight of her decision pressing heavily yet strangely lifting her shoulders at the same time. For the first time, her path was hers, not society's, not her parents'. Hers. She found Jonathan waiting by the Serpentine as though he had known she would come. His coat was plain, his posture weary, but when he saw her, the shadows lifted from his face. You came, he breathed. Clara nodded, tears burning her eyes. I refused him. I refused them all. Jonathan stepped closer, his hands trembling as though restraining himself. Do you know what that means? They will turn on you. They will call you ruined, reckless. They will shut every door. Then let them, Clara said fiercely. I would rather face the world's scorn with truth than drown in its approval with lies. For a moment neither moved. Then Jonathan reached out, cupping her face with a gentleness that undid her entirely. Clara Whitmore, you are braver than anyone I have ever known. And you, she whispered, are worth everything I've risked. Their lips met, tentative at first, then with the full force of everything they had denied themselves for months. The world around them blurred, the gas lamps flickering to life, the murmur of the city in the distance, the faint rustle of leaves overhead. For that single moment they existed outside the rules, outside the whispers, outside time itself. When they parted, breathless and shaken, Jonathan pressed his forehead to hers. There will be consequences. Clara smiled through her tears. Then we'll face them together. That night, Clara returned home to find her mother waiting in the darkened parlor, eyes glinting with unshed tears. You've chosen your ruin, her mother said, voice hoarse. No, Clara replied softly. I've chosen my life. For the first time she felt it was true. The scandal broke within 48 hours. On Monday morning, Clara's name appeared in the gossip columns again, this time with brutal clarity. Miss Whitmore, the American heiress, has spurned the honorable attentions of Lord Pembroke. Her reasons are unclear, though whispers suggest a most unsuitable attachment elsewhere. One wonders whether fortune can excuse impropriety forever. Her mother flung the paper into the fire before breakfast was half served. They will devour us alive, she hissed, pacing the dining room. You've handed them the knife, Clara, and begged them to cut. Her father said little. He sat at the head of the table, jaw tight, eyes shadowed. When Clara rose to leave, his only words were, "Do not expect my protection when the world turns its back." The world did turn, swiftly and mercilessly. Invitations once flowing like champagne dried up overnight. At church, ladies who had once nodded politely now turned their heads, whispering behind gloved hands. A group of young men laughed openly as Clara passed on Bond Street, one calling after her, "Careful, Miss Whitmore, or you'll end up with a doctor instead of a duke." The cruelty stung, but worse was the silence at home. Her mother refused to speak except in clipped, icy commands. Her father buried himself in ledgers and avoided her gaze entirely. The townhouse, once bustling with anticipation for her debut, became a house of shadows. And still Jonathan came. He could not visit openly, but he found ways. Letters slipped through Mary's hand, brief meetings in quiet corners of Kensington Gardens, a chance encounter staged at Hatched's where he pressed a volume of poetry into her hands. Each moment was stolen, each word spoken under the weight of risk, yet each deepened the bond between them. "You should not be here," Clara whispered one evening when he appeared near the garden gate, hat pulled low, collar turned up against the mist. "Nor should you be alone in that house," he replied. "They treat you as if you've sinned. You've only been honest." Clara's throat ached. "Honesty has cost me everything." Jonathan caught her hands, eyes blazing. "Then let it buy you freedom." "Clara, leave it behind. Come with me." The words hung in the damp night air, daring her to grasp them. Elopement. Escape. The wild, unthinkable choice. Her heart leapt at the thought. No more whispers, no more cages. Yet fear coiled quickly behind it. To leave her family, her countrymen, her fortune. To step outside everything she had ever known. Was she strong enough? "I need time," she whispered, her fingers trembling in his. Jonathan nodded, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "Time then. But know this, I will wait only as long as you need, not as long as society demands." The very next morning, the storm intensified. Clara received a letter from Lady Harcourt herself, written in the most cuttingly polite language imaginable. "Miss Whitmore, society is a fragile fabric. One loose thread may unravel the whole. I urge you, for your sake and ours, to cease your dangerous association before you destroy not only your prospects, but your family's standing. Lord Pembroke is a generous man. He may forgive your indiscretion if you act swiftly." Clara crushed the letter in her hands, heat rising in her chest. It was not concern, it was threat veiled in civility. A reminder that in London reputation was currency, and she had been declared bankrupt. That evening, her mother cornered her in the parlor. "I have spoken with Lady Pembroke. If you apologize, publicly, there is still hope. A quiet marriage, a chance to repair what you've broken." Clara's heart clenched. "You would have me beg for forgiveness for wanting love?" Her mother's face twisted, torn between fear and anger. "I would have you survive. Do you think society will let you live if you defy it? You are a woman, Clara. Women are not allowed choices." Clara's voice trembled, but her words rang clear. "Then I will make one anyway." She left her mother standing rigid, staring after her as though she were already a ghost. A week later, Clara attended a charity concert with her parents, one of the few invitations they still dared accept. The hall was crowded, gaslit chandeliers casting golden light across silks and jewels. Halfway through the evening, as the orchestra swelled, Clara felt a presence. She turned, and there he was. Jonathan, standing at the back, eyes fixed on her with unshakable intensity. Whispers rippled instantly through the crowd. Fans lifted, heads tilted, every gaze darting between Clara and the physician. Her mother stiffened beside her. Her father's hand clenched hard around his cane. It was exposure, bare and undeniable. The rumor had become spectacle. Clara's pulse thundered. She could turn away, deny him, let the moment pass and salvage what little remained of her reputation. Or she could hold his gaze and let the world see the truth she could no longer hide. Slowly, deliberately, Clara raised her chin. She met Jonathan's eyes and did not look away. The room erupted in whispers, scandal blooming like wildfire. But in that moment, Clara felt something she had not felt in months: power. Whatever came next, she had made her choice. The morning after the concert, London was ablaze. Newspapers carried the story on their front pages. "American heiress defies convention. Miss Clara Whitmore seen in public exchange of glances with Dr. Jonathan Avery." The language dripped with scandal. Columnists debated whether she had lost her mind or whether American girls simply had no sense of propriety. At breakfast, Clara faced the silence of her parents. Her father's newspaper lay folded neatly on the table, unread. Her mother sat with her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles shone white. Finally, her father spoke. "You have humiliated us." Clara met his gaze evenly. "I have been honest." "Honesty is not a shield," he said bitterly. It is a weapon you have turned upon your own family. Her mother whispered, "Clara, please, do not destroy yourself entirely. Tell me it was madness, a fleeting mistake. We can still repair this." But Clara only shook her head. It was not madness. It was truth. That afternoon, Jonathan appeared at the garden gate, despite the risk. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his voice was steady. "They'll never forgive you now," he said softly. "Then let them not," Clara replied. "I'm finished begging for forgiveness for wanting a life of my own." Jonathan studied her face, searching for hesitation. Finding none, he took her hand. "Then come with me. Not in secret, not as scandal, but as choice." The words carried a dangerous simplicity. "Come with me. Leave behind the drawing rooms, the whispers, the iron cage of expectation. Step into something unknown but real." "Yes," Clara said, her heart pounding. "Yes, Jonathan. I will." They married quietly, not in the grandeur of St. George's or St. Paul's, but in a modest chapel near Bloomsbury. The witnesses were few: Mary the maid, Jonathan's colleague from the hospital, and a sympathetic curate who asked no unnecessary questions. There were no pearls, no lace imported from Paris, no orchestra filling the air with Handel. Clara wore a simple blue gown, her hair pinned with daisies Jonathan had gathered himself. When the vows were spoken, she felt no heavy cloak of obedience settle on her shoulders. Instead, she felt a lightness, as though she were stepping into her own skin for the first time. Afterward, they walked through the quiet streets, hand in hand. London bustled around them, indifferent to their new beginning. For the first time, Clara felt no need to hide. She was not Miss Whitmore, daughter of a financier. She was Clara Avery, wife by choice, partner by will. The weeks that followed were not easy. Invitations ceased entirely. Family friends crossed the street to avoid her. Her parents disowned her publicly, though privately her mother sent a single letter, unsigned, containing nothing but a pressed violet and the words, "Be happy." Jonathan's income as a physician was modest compared to the fortune Clara might have inherited. Their home was a narrow townhouse near the hospital, its windows drafty, its furniture plain. Clara learned to manage without servants, cooking simple meals, mending her own gowns. At first, the adjustment was jarring, but gradually she found satisfaction in the work of her own hands. And Jonathan's presence made up for every loss. He returned each evening weary but alive with stories, of lives saved, of medicine advancing, of struggles that mattered far more than society's gossip. Clara began writing essays, first for small periodicals, then for American journals eager for her perspective on London's rigid class system. Her words, sharp and insightful, found eager readers across the Atlantic. A year later, Clara gave birth to a son. Jonathan held the boy with tears streaking his cheeks, whispering promises of a better world. They named him Henry after no ancestor, no lord, but simply because they liked the sound. When Clara looked at her son's sleeping face, she felt no regret for the glittering world she had left behind. This was her wealth, her legacy. Not silk gowns or ballroom triumphs, but love, freedom, and the chance to build something new. By the time whispers of her scandal faded, London itself had begun to change. Railways expanded, new industries rose, and old hierarchies cracked under the weight of modernity. Some still spoke of Clara Whitmore with disdain, a cautionary tale of a girl who wasted fortune for passion. But others, quietly, admiringly, spoke of her as a woman who dared. Years later, at a gathering of young suffragists, Clara listened as a girl scarcely older than she had been at her debut declared, "We are more than the roles assigned to us. We deserve the right to choose." Clara smiled then, recognizing the same fire that had burned in her own heart years before. She thought of Jonathan, of Henry, of the life they had built in defiance of convention. And she knew she had chosen well. The story of Clara Whitmore was never the tale of a girl ruined by scandal. It was the story of an American who crossed the Atlantic seeking a place in society and found instead something rarer: freedom to write her own future. In the end, the Victorians believed love was a delicate dance within rigid walls. Clara proved it could also be a leap, dangerous, daring, but worth everything.